Do you know why you're here? You're here because you want more. The choice is yours. To play or not to play.
Hello and welcome back. This is Expanding the Zone. This is show number 11. I'm Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt as always. And I tell you, I want to first just say welcome, invite you in here in the next hour. However you may be listening, watching this on YouTube. As we always say, we're out there everywhere, wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, check us out on YouTube, SBC Sports Zone Shayne. And I guess, Matt, tonight, the show number 11 is kind of to play or not to play type of thing is kind of the title that comes to my mind. It's one of those things that takes all of this, with this being more of a high school focus, how much education, opportunity, exercise, involvement be on a team versus how much do we start to get some of this entertainment, the atmosphere, financial, all of these different factors that come in. And I know we're going to really focus on the athlete, the parents, the coach, and so forth. Real excited about this topic. Obviously, it's generated a lot from what we see all the way at the professional levels, all of the professional sports scenes trying to figure this out, right? All these factors and the different things. And how does that influence the high school game? That's kind of what we're after here. But before I kind of turn it over and get your take on show number 11, if you don't mind me taking just a second, I'd like to kind of look back. And I just want to thank you, the fans, for all the feedback. Just 10 shows into this, it's unreal. I can tell that new people are being introduced to the show all the time, and they're going back and listening. I had some feedback, Matt, this week on show number 2, or cheating, where they were talking about how they think rules being so vague oftentimes lead too much room for interpretation, and they think that's a problem. And I got to thinking how much that impacts so many things we talked about in shows, 3 through 10, following that cheating show. Also had some baseball feedback and some different things. I've enjoyed that. And obviously this week's feedback comes from last week. Really enjoyed talking to 6, 7 really good officials. I probably had almost 18, 19 different things to unpack in terms of feedback from the official show. And I just enjoyed it. Some of it was just more technical stuff of like my idea of the 2-man crew not going over real well, saying in today's time, today's athlete, that middle coverage in basketball is too important. I challenged a couple officials that I knew a little bit better, saying that you feel like with 2, you'd be just a little bit more aggressive with the whistle. And some of them said, yes, maybe. But what would happen is, some of your newer officials that are not used to that 2-man experience, a lot of times you could let too much go. So I respected all that feedback. I enjoyed that. Obviously, it's kind of a nice transition into the tonight's show, because let's face it, they're a part of sports returning as well. So, Matt, the only other thing I would ask the fans to do, based on that type of feedback and new listeners, if you like what we're doing, subscribe to us, give us a nice rating, but also, reach out to maybe 3 people you think would enjoy the show and share Expanding the Zone with them. And because I just think the more our show grows, the more perspective we get, the more feedback we get. I think it's just going to do nothing but make this particular thing that much better. So, Matt, on that note, I'll kind of hush up here for a second, welcome you to the show. And as you hear me describe show 11, to play or not to play, and you kind of heard me throw out all the factors, I certainly know you had a long list of things that kind of make you passionate about tonight's topic.
Yeah, Shayne, with this show, I think you and I have tried to avoid the COVID topic a little bit, right? Because when we started this show right in the middle of all this craziness, the last thing we wanted to do is just be one more voice talking about the same thing, right? We really wanted to try to get into other areas, and I think to this point we have. But let's face it, this show's driven by, in a lot of ways, where we are at in the sports world at this time. And we're right now, at least, the decision-making process around whether what we're doing moving forward, what the future looks like is everywhere. If you think about it, it's the major topic in all of sports right now.
Absolutely.
Right? What is Major League Baseball going to have a season? The NBA's decided to do their thing in what they're referring to as a bubble, right?
Bubble in Orlando. Yep.
Yeah, and stuff's coming out. Whether are we going to have football season and all this stuff, and so we felt like this week we probably need to tackle this a little bit in terms of high school sports and where we're headed, both what we're doing now and then where we're headed here in the immediate future. And I think right now in high school sports, there's a lot happening. It seems like almost on a daily basis, but definitely like a weekly basis. We started just a couple weeks ago at the beginning of June, we were allowed to start working with the athletes, right? We were what the National Federation of High Schools referred to as phase 1, where we can get back into the weight room with limited number of kids, back into gyms with a limited number of kids, doing skill workouts, non-contact stuff. So a lot of schools have, begin to do that. Now, 14 days goes by, we transfer into this phase 2 where now, you're allowed to have more kids outside, up to 50 kids outside. You're allowed to, some sports like what's considered the low risk sports, which are basically your running sports and like golf, are basically allowed to just go do their thing, have basically full practices with no restrictions. Your moderate risk sports, basketball, baseball, basically every other sport other than like football and wrestling for the most part, the moderate sports are allowed to start having modified practices, whatever that means, which is a kind of a little side.
Back to that vague thing we just talked about. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, and I'm not one to, believe me, I'm not one to hold back my thoughts about the National Federation or Ohio High School Athletic Association for that matter. But I do, let's cut these guys a little bit of a break here. These were uncharted waters, right? And they're trying to figure this thing out like we all are as we go. But I think at times we need a little better direction or definition. When you tell me as a basketball coach, I've coached basketball for 25 years, and you say, okay, you can have a modified practice. I don't even know what that means. I know modified means I can change, make some changes, but what changes? Am I allowed to play 2-on-2 instead of 5-on-5? Am I allowed? I don't know what that even means. So I think we need some specific direction. In our state today, Shayne, the governor comes out from and I'm getting this sort of right before recording here, so I hope I'm saying this right, but the information I'm getting from our local health department and things of that nature is our governor now is saying as of June 22nd, we can have full contact stuff, full contact workouts. And so I'm assuming like basketball is going to be allowed to have scrimmages and 5-on-5 situations. And so, but does that mean football's allowed to, because they've lifted the limitation? Is football allowed to throw the pads on and go at it? I don't know. We need some direction here. Now, I know the OHSAA came out today. I read a tweet just before we came on to record, Shayne, that we're supposed to know more by this Friday from our state association. So hopefully they're going to lend some guidance, because these are times where we need specific direction as coaches and as athletic administrators. We can't be left out there to wonder, well, what's the wording of this mean? I mean, with that, these associations need to come out and be very, very direct, I think, with what we are and aren't allowed to do. But leadership, Shayne, right now, wouldn't you say is more crucial than ever? I mean, not only the leadership of those associations, but I look at like leadership of our schools. I saw where a couple schools are going through situations right now, Shayne, where they're not hiring their coaches for the fall because out of fear that we may not have fall sports, and they don't want to get into that whole thing we had in the spring with whether they should pay their coaches or not. The problem with that is schools are having workouts. We're doing things in the summer. So I would think, if you're not hiring your coaches, you're leaving yourself liable if something would happen and you don't have hired coaches working with your kids. To me, again, it goes back to that leadership thing of why are we trying to cut corners as school administrations and to save a few bucks, open ourselves up to some serious problems. Why not just restructure the contracts, Shayne? Don't you agree? The wording of them, and just say, hey, look, if we don't have a season, we're going to pay you 25% of your contract since you did off-season stuff. There's ways we can word these contracts and things we can do, but that's what I'm talking about with leadership. It's the leadership of our school administrations, leadership of our coaches, leadership of the high up, the state association, right, the national federation. More than ever right now, as we try to transition back to some normalcy, I think leadership's more crucial than ever.
Matt, real quick, because we're going to reference it through the whole show tonight. We put together a survey for 3 groups of people: an athlete,
Right.
a parent, and a coach. And we're probably going to fly all over the place and connect. But just to make reference, make sense to the listener for the show tonight, briefly just talk about why those 3 groups, and maybe give it just a general idea of what it is you're asking. That way, when we do reference it through the show, it'll make a little bit more sense to people.
Yeah, Shayne, I'm glad you asked me that, because I didn't really mention that in the opening here, but I kind of stole the idea, to be honest with you. I wish, like I said, I had it on my own, but like most things in coaching, you don't create, you steal.
Mm-hmm.
But ESPN did a survey recently, and I don't know if you saw it or not. I believe that it was 75 college football players. I think that was the number, was 75. Supposedly random. I don't know. I don't know how they selected these guys, but it was anonymous. We don't know what schools they came from or whatever. And they basically asked a series of questions. And some of those questions we sort of stole, and then they asked a couple questions in that survey that really had nothing to do with high school, talked about next level, going to the NFL or some recruiting things. So, they had their own questions that kind of pertained to them at the college level. And I added a couple at the high school level that pertained, I think, to what we're talking about. But basically, we sent out a survey, Shayne, like you said, with basically 5 questions on it. And in no particular order here, really. We basically asked the question: would you be willing to play, practice, full go right now, get after it, even without a vaccination for COVID? We asked that question. We asked the question of, if you had to play your games in empty stadiums or very limited crowds, would you be willing to play? We asked the question about, would it affect your opinion of whether or not you wanted to play, assuming school wasn't in session or was in session, because all these things going around where kids might go 2 days a week and then another group of kids come 2 days a week. Would that affect it? We asked how you would feel about riding buses and being in locker rooms, close-knit quarters with other athletes. And then we asked the question, how long do you need as an athlete to get ready to play a season? In other words, how much training do you need? Because, the season could be delayed, right? That's one of the things you hear. What if the season's delayed? If so, how much? You're hearing it in baseball right now, right? If these clowns can get themselves together and have a baseball season, then how much spring training do you need, right? Same way with high school. How much practice do you need to get ready? So it's really those 5 questions, Shayne, that you're talking about. And I know we're going to just kind of hit on these answers as we go tonight.
Well, I was fascinated by it. And again, to be clear there, that you took versions of those questions and asked the athlete, asked parents, asked coaches, and different things.
Yes, all 3 groups. And we just kind of sent it out. It was really random. Yeah. We sent it out on social media. We sent it out to some of the contacts we have.
We had probably over 100 things of feedback if you combine all of them, I believe.
Oh, easily. We had let's see here. We had 70 coaches. We had 41 parents, and we had 54 kids. So in a course of 3 days, that was what we had in terms of the total responses.
Well, Matt, I don't want to make this just a boring segment where we sit here and rattle off numbers and data and all that point. But what I do want to do is kind of, jump into some different things, and where you see fit, please share some of those data points. I want to just start here, if you don't mind. On my notes, the number one thing I was most intrigued by is I think it starts with the athlete. And here's why. An athlete, the older he or she gets, maybe starts to think a little bit independently. Obviously, at the high school level, there has to be some parent involvement and so forth. But I just was curious about the athlete. Are they anxious to play? Does atmosphere play a role? What would you say jumped out in the data to you in terms of the reaction of our athletes?
I was a little surprised on some of the the stuff we got back from the athletes. For instance, the one question where the athletes, where the players, their responses were vastly different than their parents or their coaches, was the idea of playing in front of no crowd or a limited crowd.
Wow.
Parents, when
How
asked that,
extreme are you talking?
well, when for instance, 83% of parents said they were fine with playing in front of nobody or limited crowds. 75% of coaches were fine with that. And actually, that number is a little deceiving because 22% were unsure. So you're only getting a 3% from coaches that said
Gotcha.
no. Okay.
Right.
Absolutely no. I mean, there was 22% unsure, but only 50% of the athletes said they wanted to play in that environment. Only half the athletes, with a full 33% saying no. Okay. So that's, leaves 17% undecided, right? So a third of the athletes said absolutely not. They don't want to play in that environment. Only half of those athletes said they were good with that. I guess, Shayne, does that surprise you? I'll give you an example. At the college level, now think about this for a minute. 83% of those football players that were interviewed at the college level said they would be fine playing in front of nobody. Why 33% more college players would be willing to do that, and 50% or 33% less high school? I mean, what's your take on that, I guess?
Well, I started to chuckle there. I mean, it's not funny. I think the word would be ironic. And again, let me explain where I'm coming from. As I hear the data here, right here live on the show for the first time, I can't help but look at it like, remember our baseball show there about 3-4 weeks ago, where we talked spring sports and we talked about different factors in terms of growth in the sport. And I've always asked this question: are things like football the best sports, or do they provide the best event? So like when you talk about when the tailgating isn't there, or the atmosphere isn't there, the Friday night lights loses its glamour, or the 2,000 people in the stands, or what does cheerleading, what does band playing look like, what all of those factors look like in terms of atmosphere. And it kind of returns you to a 5 o'clock start in the spring for a baseball, softball, track event. Does that make sense? It's one of those things of, I would even go as far as we overlap these things to say, I'm sure parents are okay until they're told they can't go and watch.
Well, yeah,
I'm saying?
I think they were probably banking on, well, parents can come.
Parents can come. Yeah. Now, I'll even throw it as far as, not to get too far off topic here, but I would even go as far with administration of, are you as a athletic director, or as a principal, or as a superintendent or board member, how excited are they to go through some of the concerns of playing 10 weeks of varsity and junior high football if you don't in return get to send 2,000 people through the admission gate? You see what I'm saying? Right. So it's one of those things of, the simplicity of playing. I think at the end of the day, kids would like to play, but I think just to give you honest feedback, the first thing that jumped out at me is when I heard that was, it kind of does remind me how much these athletes value the opportunity to take in the atmosphere and to play in those particular events. You follow what I'm saying there? Because I hear that from, like on the boys side, I hear that from a comparison of, say, a football or basketball player in terms of what they get to play in compared to, say, a baseball. Or even the way volleyball, I know, is grown in Southern Ohio, the way volleyball or basketball is compared to, say, a softball event. I mean, that atmosphere plays a big factor.
Yeah, it really does. And I guess when I first saw these results, and I purposely, like you, Shayne, you're not seeing these till now. I mean, we purposely did it that way, where you're not seeing these results until we're doing this show.
Right.
And I waited to look at them until just a little while ago, because I didn't really want to look at them as they were coming in over the last 3 days. But I was encouraged from this standpoint. It encouraged me that high school kids today still care about the experience. Does that make sense? Like, it's not just,
yes.
They're not just playing for an opportunity to earn a scholarship or selfish reasons. There's still something to be said for the experience of high school sports, the extension of the classroom that's so important to guys like me and you as coaches, that, hey, at the high school level, there's still a certain purity to this game. Because like I said, at the college football level, 83% of those kids said they'd play in front of an empty stadium. And I got to feel like part of that is they're playing for other reasons at that point in their lives, right? It's not the experience anymore. It's an opportunity to go to the next level. It's playing for a free education. Whatever their motive is, it differs as you get older and as you play at that next level than what it is at the high school level. So I guess that part of it encouraged me. And then the other thing I found a little bit ironic on that, though, was, and we'll get into this a little more probably throughout the show, is here we are in this health crisis, right? And there's still a lot of people who there's some fear out there from a health standpoint. Well, the kids, if you look at their survey, 88% of them are ready to go full go right now without a vaccine. 90% felt good on buses or in locker rooms, but only 50% want to play in front of no fans. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So what I'm saying is, in the athlete's eye, this isn't a health issue anymore, right? Because they're not scared of the health part. They're scared of losing their high school experience, having to play in front of nobody.
Right.
Real quickly before I let you bounce back, Shayne, because I want to hear your input on that. But the financial part, for sure, and we'll talk about this probably a little bit later, but you're right. I mean, the financial part for school administrators is extremely frightening. The thought of not having fans in football. I mean, I know the school I'm at, probably 35% of our revenue comes from football. And we haven't had, a powerhouse program where we're getting $10,000 and $12,000 gates. There's some schools that I'd say probably 60% of their revenue comes from football. Some of those perennial powerhouses that are packing the stands every single night out.
Matt,
right?
real quick on that. I don't mean to put you on the spot here. I hope I don't catch you too far off guard here. If you take say you play 5 football games at home,
right?
A school that loves their basketball, if you get 10 or 11 home games boys, 10, 11 home games girls, does basketball revenue even come close to football at your average high school in your time as AD, in your opinion?
No, it just really doesn't. I was fortunate enough a few years ago, a couple years back, to have just a phenomenal team, and a team that our community rallied around. And we had gates for basketball that were just unprecedented gates. I mean, I'm talking huge crowds where we had to quit letting people in, or we had, you just packed houses every single night. And you're still, at the end of the day, not equaling your football gates in most cases. I'll give you an idea. I've heard like really big time football programs in our area have gates of $10,000, $12,000, $15,000.
Right.
The year I'm talking about in basketball, just to give people a comparison, where we were almost having to shut the doors because the gym was so full, you're talking $4,000 gate. Mm-hmm. You see the difference there? So when you start talking about, those are your maximums, obviously. I mean, that
gives you perspective on why people are so concerned at really all levels in terms of these fall crowds and the financial.
Oh, because basically, like in our case, an okay Friday night football gate is as big as a great basketball gate. So to answer your question, no, even with 10 games, you're not equaling that amount. So yeah, it's just, I don't know why. I mean, it's probably one game a week, right? It's the whole football Friday night thing. We're going.
It's everything.
That's the one
there's
show.
Cheerleaders, there's band, there's different things. You get 5 opportunities to come. I talked to one AD this week in terms of our officials talked about how we are very spoiled here in the Side of Valley Conference. The banner here behind me. We all live in an average of about a 25-30 minute drive on the road. Really, the extreme would be about 50 minutes, where most conferences, I know that's not normal. I know a lot of conferences have more 45, 50 minutes. So a lot of their gates aren't the same and so forth. So that opportunity to have those particular gates, I think, makes a lot of sense to me. Here's my next thought on this, Matt, is if student athletes, as they start to get older, certainly can start to think independently and so forth. I know right around the middle school level, as a teacher of 20 years at that level, those are some of the skills you're trying to help, people start to develop. But let's face it, I'll see middle school girls love Johnny forever today and Tommy forever tomorrow. You know what I mean? They're still trying to figure it out, and they're still trying to kind of find their lane.
Right.
You as a parent at the high school level, high school and down, which is what we're talking about here, the parent has to have, an opportunity to put their child. Here's the best comparison I can use from a sports analogy is, as a baseball coach, when I go out to the mound, that competitor on the mound, every time you ask him, you doing okay? Yeah, coach.
Yeah.
I'm fine, I'm fine. I coach a young man right now. Well, in fact, he's just graduating this year, Lane Metler, who's going to pitch at the University of Rio Grande. And, you go out, take him out of a game or whatever. He's a straight A student, nicest guy you ever meet. He's the most respectful person you will ever coach. I mean, a complete pleasure to coach. But I'm telling you right now, you go out and try to take him out of a 3-2 game in the sixth inning, he'd be ready to fight you. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. But it's our job as adults. Don't you agree? It's our job as adults to protect the athlete, isn't it? It's kind of like the concussion protocol in the NFL where they hide their helmet.
Right.
It's
right.
Don't you feel like that throughout these surveys that it has to be a very respectful thing for the administration and for coaches to pay attention to what it is the parent deems safe for his or her child? What's your thoughts on that concept of the parent involvement?
Well, one of the reasons we added the parent to our survey in this was for that very reason, right? I mean, parents are going to play a big role in this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I feel like parents are going to play a big role in schools, the way we open up, quite honestly. Obviously, that's going to be dependent, number one, probably on the government of the state. All right, the state government's going to have the number one say in how schools open up in the fall. But I think parents are going to influence that a lot. Here's the funny thing. I started laughing when I looked at this survey a little bit because, I mean, we might have surveyed, about 42 of the, 41 or 42 of the toughest parents in our area or something, because the numbers are off the charts with the parents in terms of returning to play. 97% of parents say, let's go full go right now. 94% of parents say they could care less whether we're in school full time. They want to play.
Probably sick of them being at the house.
No, 97% of the parents are okay with them being on buses. And what I found funny was how long it took athletes to get ready to play, like how long you need. The athletes said about 3 weeks was the popular answer. Coaches said 3 or 4. And I can tell you as a coach, I'd like to have about 10, you know what I mean? And I still don't feel like we're ready. But coaches said 3 or 4. Parents ended up saying 4 weeks as their most, but 28% of parents said, 2 weeks. Just give them 2 weeks. Like, does a dog stretch before it chases a car? You know what I mean? Just get out there and start playing. But no, I just found it funny with the parents. 83% said they were fine, like I mentioned earlier about empty stadiums. Again, what that tells me, though, in all seriousness here for a minute is, if the parents, I mean, you're talking the people who love these kids more than anybody on earth, right? Mm-hmm. They are not scared of sickness right now for whatever reason, wrong or right. Whether it's just this thing's went on long enough where the fear has started to subside or whatever.
Right.
They're not concerned. 97% are saying put them on a bus with each other, put them in a locker room with each other. So there is the health issue. Again, we keep going back to this COVID thing and the health. The athletes aren't scared of anything right now health-wise, and the parents are even less concerned. You're talking mid to high 90% of those parents are saying, let's go. I don't know what's that. I mean, did that jump out at you at all, I guess?
Well, it did. You said something on last week's show. You actually said it 2 or 3 different times in different, situations of the show that really jumped out at me, and it's really stuck with me this week. And it's kind of comes to my mind again here tonight on this week's show. You talked about how when you're solving a dynamic problem, it's not a one size fits all. It's not like
right.
You're just going to actually, hey, here's one solution, the end, and
right.
And boy, does that make sense with the COVID-19. The thing that jumps out at me when this survey started, I did not see the results, but as a result of the survey, I know my phone started blowing up. Some coaches, some parents, some different people now all of a sudden wanting to talk to me off the record. You know what I mean? I don't know how they answer different things, but they were, different
Right.
conversations. And this whole one size fits all thing really jumps out at me, because I don't know what your take is on this, but I think it's really unfair, and it's really kind of a lack of creativity to say that if one sport can't go, then they all can't go. That's silly to me. If I'm an athletic director and I've got a football game going on, Matt, and I see lightning, we need, for the safety of those people, correct? I mean, I think we'd all agree, for the
Right.
safety of those kids, for the safety of the officials, for the safety of the fans, we need to follow proper protocol and get them off the field. I wouldn't then run into the gym and tell them, hey, there's lightning outside, you need to stop the volleyball game.
Right. Right.
See what I'm saying?
Right.
Because the same safety protocol doesn't fit for those two events. And I hope that analogy makes sense to you, because, there's, as you kind of said in the opening, a foursome going out and walking the golf course just isn't taking the same risk as 22 athletes just banging into each other on every snap. You follow my thing here? And do you feel that fits kind of what you were saying about how it really shows a lack of creativity if we're going to be so closed-minded not to treat this, sport by sport, and kind of get as many student athletes, kind of back at it within reason as quick as possible?
Yeah, and I think a while back, if you remember, our state commissioner Jerry Snodgrass here in Ohio basically made the comment, and I don't want to pretend like I'm quoting him here because I'm going off memory, but paraphrasing, he basically said in so many words, we are not opposed to, or we're not shutting down the idea of some sports going forward and some sports not going forward. In other words, like you're saying, we're not going to just say, okay, well, football is a no-go, so we're going to shut down the entire fall. It sounds to me like there is a chance that some sports could happen and some sports couldn't happen. Is that right, wrong? I mean, I'm with you. I don't see why we punish any more kids than we have to with this thing, but at the same time, I get it. It would be awfully difficult for an athlete to say, "Oh man, I missed out on my season," but
Right.
why did everybody else get to have theirs? But reality is, like you say, if you're basing it off risk, and again, how much risk is there? That's a whole, we could debate that, and that's a nationwide
No,
debate,
sure,
right?
sure.
But yeah, if you're basing it on risk, yeah, you could definitely have some sports and not others.
Where do you stand on the in school or not in school, and kind of anything from the data jump out at you there? Because that's one that keeps. I mean, I'm probably asked that question at least once every other day.
Well, it's funny. When I looked at the coaches, Shayne, their responses, they were by far the lowest on would you play if not in school regularly, only 75%. So still 3/4. So the coaches said, yeah, let's play anyway. But compared to the 94% for parents and 85% for athletes, the coaches were a little more hesitant with that. The funny thing is the coaches were a little more hesitant on everything. And I think this leads to the answer of your question, Shayne. I want to answer your question, but these numbers sort of lead to that. I think when you work in the school your whole life, and many of these coaches are teachers, right?
Sure.
Many of them have made a lifetime of education. I think you tend to value, one, the importance of being in school, and again, these sports being an extension of the classroom. I think you understand as a coach, let's be real honest here, it's a lot tougher to coach if your kids are only in school, say 2 days a week. You're trying to have football practice after school, and was it Johnny's turn to be in school today? No, shoot, he's home today. Let's see if he overslept. Let's say, whatever. But so it presents some logistical issues as a coach. And I think the longer you're in education, you have sort of been trained in today's society to be, for the lack of a better word, a little bit of a worrywart, right? I mean, we are so concerned due to the society, just kind of society we live in, of litigation. We're concerned about blowback or backlash when things go wrong. It's just the nature of the game. It's unfortunately the way it is, but you see where I'm coming from on that? Is that an unfair statement, or because I just think there's such a public perception concern in our schools today that's part of it. If we're not in school and we're out here playing football on Friday nights, it's somebody's going to say this. We're out here playing football on Friday night, but yet these kids can only go to school 2 days a week. Why aren't you worried about them getting the coronavirus on the football field? Someone's saying that, right or wrong. Someone's going to say it's. We know in this country right now more than ever, there are people that when they get a cause, they go all out for that cause. Okay, someone's going to use that as an opportunity. Well, you guys are putting football in front of education. 2 days a week at school, but yet we have football on Friday nights. 5 days a week we're practicing football, right? So someone's going to use that. So I think, do I have a problem with it? Not really, because I want to see kids play, and I just think it's healthy for kids to have something to do. But do I see where some people in schools are going to be hesitant? Yeah, I do.
My take on the coaching, that did not surprise me at all. And I guess there's a couple reasons why. Number one, and I think this is kind of what you're saying is, I'm not a parent, so correct me if I'm wrong. I assume a parent is going to look at it first and foremost through the perspective of how does this influence my child or my children, right? Whereas as a coach or as an athletic administrator, you're trying to look at it in terms of a big scope of people, right? A bunch of different people coming from different homes and different families and so forth. So I think that's certainly a factor. The second thing kind of comes from, the responsibility that is put on today's coaches. And as we've said, you know what you're signing up for, but it's one of those things that these are not our full-time positions. Our full-time positions oftentimes are teachers or something in the school system, or many of our coaches have, jobs out in the communities and so forth, and they come at 3:30, 4 o'clock and coach our student athletes, right? So
Right.
these are not your full-time paid positions. So a lot of times you have a lot more responsibility on your plate than you really get paid for, if I'm being blunt. It's one of those things. Let's face it. What just about every profession I can come up with, education's like this for sure. When you go from a teacher to a counselor, or into administration, or up to the top superintendent or so forth, and the business world I think works this way just the same. Is the higher you go up, one reason you make more money or you have more benefits is because your responsibility grows. Is that correct? I mean,
Yeah.
you have, I think you would agree that you have more responsibility as an athletic director than you did when you first started out as a freshman boys basketball coach, right? Sure. So it's a situation of coaches are going to be a little bit more cautious. We may have our own opinions, away from the field or away from the court, but we understand when we become a representation of that school that we have to understand protocol. And as you said in your opening, things are so vague, you really start to question when it's you making the decision. I think there's just a little bit of apprehension there. It's not that you don't want to play. It's not that you don't want to have the opportunity to coach your kids, but don't you feel like that responsibility, when you don't necessarily have the power to carry through with it, or maybe all the support things in place, that has to give you a little bit of uncertainty, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I think what you're saying is definitely a valid point, and I don't argue it. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. The cynical side of me, though, thinks there's probably there's another dynamic here at play. And see if you follow me, Shayne, on this. I said this a while back when we were right in the heart of the shutdown and all that. And I think we might have even talked about it on one of our shows, and I can't remember. But I'm afraid when we talked about what's it going to look like when we get back to quote unquote normal, or how does this thing end? And one of the things I've always felt like is after the health fear actually subsides a little bit, there's going to then be this lingering effect of people being apprehensive about moving forward. Okay. Even after the health fear kind of subsides, there's going to be this, I don't know though, should we, shouldn't we? And you even said, I remember in that show, it's hard to be first, right? It's as a leader, it's hard to be the one stepping up and
Absolutely.
say, hey, let's do
Absolutely.
this. And then if it doesn't work out, right? But I guess, we're talking about surveys tonight. And I guess this is my best way I can describe my point here. If we were to take 100 people right now, Shayne, a mixed bag between school administrators, coaches, parents, I don't even care, throw in some medical people, throw in whoever, 100 people. Do you think the majority of those people, I guess I get the sense that the majority of those people, if you ask them, hey, in terms of reopening our schools, in terms of sending every kid day one to school, 5 days a week, just like normal, in terms of putting our athletes out there just like normal, are you more concerned about kids contracting this virus, or are you more concerned about the blowback and the backlash and the litigation and the criticism if a couple kids get this virus? Okay. I think the vast majority, if you injected those 100 people with truth serum, which we didn't do because I don't have a prescription for that here handy, but if you injected with truth serum and said you have to tell the honest truth right now from the heart, I really think 80% of those people would say, yeah, you know what? We're less concerned about truly their kids getting sick as we are the backlash if something would happen. There's this pressure in our schools and really in society today, when you're a leader, to not be wrong on this major issue, because all it takes is one or two cases and then everyone's on your case, everyone's, why did they do this? Why did they do that? And
well, but it's not the pronoun they. It could be, why did like Matt Combs let that happen?
sure,
You see what I'm saying?
right,
So
it could be.
I agree with what you're saying. I think most people, if they got to a point and they kind of understood let's face it, we understand this virus a little bit better than we did 2-3 months ago.
Yeah.
There's still a concern. We still have to have some protocol in place. I think a lot of people are becoming more open-minded, as
Yeah.
long as their name's not at the top.
I mean, think about the numbers we talked about earlier, Shayne. Full go practice right now, full go practice and play without a vaccination. 97% of parents said go for
Wow.
it.
Yeah.
88% of kids, 85% of coaches. So what I'm saying is, I have a hard time believing that this is still a health scare issue. I believe that it has now become, not that there's not still a threat out there, okay, and there always will be, but let's face it, life is full of calculated risk here, okay? I mean, I have never been, throughout this whole process, and Shayne, from when we talk off of the show or whatever, I've never been in the camp of this whole thing's a hoax and this is ridiculous and why are we shutting down? No, this thing was a serious deal. I think a lot of what our government did, they had to do. A lot of what our schools have done, we've had to do. Look, it's serious. It's still serious. If someone gets it today, it's life-threatening to some vulnerable groups. But I guess what I'm saying is there comes a point in time where you've got to cut it loose and live life a little bit, and those calculated risks we talk about, take them. I feel like we are right now at that stage where it's I guess it's sort of transformed from health scare now to covering ourselves, right? We got to make sure we are covered in our decisions in case something would happen, that we don't get burned on this.
Well, we do. And I've got to ask you this, but I know we have a really kind of a cool closing way of doing final thoughts this week, a little different than we normally do. We're going to have a little prediction here. But I have to ask you one more thing in my notes. I want to go back to the fans versus no fans. At the higher levels, there's so many different ways for them to generate revenue, right? You know, you have TV, you have advertisement, you have different things involved. At the high school level, if we're being honest, what it would mean to the individual high schools, particularly your small schools, but I would even say your bigger schools, because they even have more sports that they're trying to support throughout, right? And what it would mean to like our state associations. Like I know here in Ohio, the amount of money they make, you know, in their state tournaments and so forth is unreal. So the fear of the long-term investment for what it is that these schools and these associations represent, the pressure of fans has to still be really, really relevant, does it not? I know earlier we talked about the atmosphere part of it, but we didn't really dive into the financial part of it. Without fans, doesn't that still have to play a huge role here on when you started calculating risk or risk reward or whatever terminology you want? The dollar bill has to be somewhere out there on the table, does it not, in terms of continuing to kind of push? Because let's face it, isn't that why? I still think the virus is very, very serious. I still think there's a lot of things you have to be careful of. But let's face it, why have we opened up restaurants? Why have we opened up more and more things and more events? It's because the economy needs
money.
it.
Yeah, it's money. I mean,
I guess that's my point is I wanted to make that point of, let's not kid ourselves. This comes back to the dollar bill and the financial pressure that leaders are facing to make these decisions.
there's no question. And here's the deal with football, and it's one of the reasons I'm concerned with it. And I'll talk a little bit about more about this in my closing remarks, but I'll say this now. One of the reasons I'm concerned with whether or not we'll have football is the idea of the fans, because here's the deal, Shayne. It's going to be awfully difficult in some administrators' eyes. And I can tell you this, I'm a little different because I'm also a coach. So I'm not just an athletic administrator, but I'm also a coach. And I love sports to the point where I would do anything I can do to make sure the season happens. Okay. But I think there are some administrators out there, probably, you're going to have a hard time convincing them that, hey, we're not allowed to have fans, but we need to figure out a way to go ahead and play these football games. Because I think some of them are going to say, man, this makes zero sense financially. It's going to cost X amount of dollars for us, because football is an expensive sport to pull off. I mean, if you have a natural surface field, for instance, you're going to spend $8,000 to $10,000 possibly a year in paint, field maintenance. You know what I mean? Manpower, all those things in order to, so we're going to do this and then not make a dime. That's going to be a tough pill for some administrators to swallow. Whereas some of your other sports, golf, tennis, cross country, they're not generating a lot of revenue anyway, so throw them out there. Volleyball does generate revenue, but you might be able, the amount of revenue most volleyball teams probably bring in over the course of a season is something that can probably be absorbed, okay? The football's a real hit. And I could see some administrators saying, man, is it worth going for it if we can't have people in the stands? And it's one of the reasons, probably out of all the fall sports, I'm worried most about football.
Well, that's good stuff. And I guess what I wanted to open up here, Matt, is I wanted to do final thoughts a little differently this week, if that's okay. And I'm going to kind of put us both on the spot here. Let's just kind of predict a little bit. We did this a little bit back, gosh, 10 shows ago, right? Back on the opening show. Let's kind of predict how this all ends come fall and so forth. And I guess I'll go first and let you, since I'm throwing it on you, and think here about it a little bit. I look at a time of leadership, as you said earlier, being so crucial. And I think as I start to put my scenario out there, I think it's very important for you to either be a leader or you to follow,
right,
or you to properly voice your opinion. I think surveys have become a huge part. It's funny that we've done this survey, because I think a lot of schools and administrators are asking community members now. They're putting out plans and different things for the fall. Hey, what do you think of this, and this? I think having your voice heard in that way, and constantly trying to be a part of the solution instead of just, constantly running your mouth about the problems.
right.
I think that's important. And I can't even imagine the challenge of new coaches in terms of what they're going through right now. I can't even imagine the challenge of new teachers and the interview process and the different things. I know just, when I go to a new doctor's office or a new dentist or a new, to a new place I've never been before, where do I park? Where do I go in? What do I do? New job, right? We've all been there before, first day of a job. You're not sure who you know.
Sure.
Am I parking in someone's spot? Am I, all those different things. So when I go to the fall, here's what I see. Here's my prediction. I see options. I see the schools putting normalcy in place, but putting options in place and protocols in place that are going to try to keep people as comfortable and as healthy as possible. And then it's going to be up to the individual parents, as well as, as they, are making decisions for their kids, to be accountable and to make great judgments, great decisions. And what I mean by that is, I think we're going to have school. We're going to have different protocols in place. We're going to have different. I think attendance is going to be a lot looser. I think a
Hey,
lot of
let me interrupt you. Do
Okay.
you think we start school 5 days a week normal or something else? Give me your prediction.
I think school is going to be in session. Yes, I think school's going to be in session 5 days a week with the option of online instruction available for parents to choose. Are you comfortable with your child in this atmosphere? If not, you'll have an online opportunity. I think attendance regulations are going to be a lot looser. I think there's going to be protocol in place for symptoms and kids being away X amount of days for this or X amount of days for that. And then as we get into sports, I think it's going to be a lot of those same things. It's never been more than now an extracurricular activity, right? It's one of those things that it's going to be offered, and it's what are you comfortable with? And I think when it comes to fans, I think it's going to be a lot of that stuff too. Hey, here's what we're doing. We're asking you to utilize some of these different factors at your own risk. So, as a fan, you're going to have to decide. It might be easier to distance yourself on a football field today. In a gym, as you said, if it's a big Friday night game in the boys basketball situation, if you're not you may not be comfortable attending, 1,700, or 2,000, in terms of attendance. You may not be comfortable doing that. So I think a lot of it is going to be placed on the accountability. Now, that's probably the part that I'm unsure of. I know there for a quick minute, I mean, literally like one night here in Ohio, they tried in the tournament of saying, what was it, Matt? 4 tickets?
Yeah, 4 tickets. I think it was 4 tickets per family at that time, Shayne, if I remember right.
Yeah, so something like basketball where it's so jam-packed in some of these gyms, maybe that's a factor. But again, I guess if I'm just predicting, Matt, I think school and sports are going to be offered as normal as possible. And I think the big thing to pay attention to is going to be the decision making and the accountability being put on parents. You do what you think is safe. And we're going to try to give you the options to do that. So I guess that's as firm as I can be. I'm obviously as unsure as the next person,
Right.
But if you're asking me right now, we're sitting here. Gosh, what would that be about? We're about 2 months out,
Right.
from when school would start. Just about. My gut tells me that we will. Now, at some point, could we have another shutdown? Sure. As this thing starts to come back and go in different waves, I certainly can. But based on where we're heading now, when I see what some of the county fairs are doing, when I see what some of these other events are doing,
right,
I think there's going to be enough in place to where the options are going to be put in place for parents to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's a good answer, Shayne. It's interesting. You made some good points. I think I am so on the fence in terms of school itself. If you'd asked me a week ago, I would have told you it's probably going to be some sort of weird 2 days on, 2 days off, different groups coming in. But I tend to probably agree with you on that part of it more. I do think it's going to end up being a normal 5-day week with more options for parents if they want to do online, if they feel like, like you said, attendance issues or attendance numbers maybe not looked at as and scrutinized quite as hard, right? Because I'll be honest with you, the whole idea of sending kids 2 days a week, and then another group of kids another 2 days a week. I think there's a lot of moving parts to that, man. I mean, you're talking a lot
How's
of.
it the same for like we've said on here before, your school has almost 3-4 times the enrollment. You know, I understand in our middle school where we have like 220 kids, if we send half of them home, that's a big deal. You send half of your middle school home, you still have more kids than we did to
Well,
begin with. I mean,
right,
it's one of
and
those dynamics of percentages.
well, and that's why I say, and you're not going to keep kids from congregating, right? I
No.
mean, you might be able to limit that within your walls because, you know, you may just be able to have enough adult supervision to say, oh, you go here, you go here. But let's face it, before school, after school, walking down the street.
Right.
I live in a community where a lot of kids walk to school. So, I mean, they're going to be walking next to each other. They're going to be there. So are we really, again, as a school, if we're doing that, are we doing it more for protection of the virus or more of covering ourselves in case, you know, I mean, again, so, but again, I don't think that's going to be a school decision as much as a government decision. But I really believe that you're probably right. It's probably a 5-day week with some options for parents. Sports wise, here's what I think. I think we will have short of some sort of surge here over the next couple weeks. Okay, we will have sports as usual for sure in every sport besides football. Football is the one I'm on the fence a little bit about. And the reason is we talked about the financial part of it already. And I saw an article the other day where one of the doctors, I can't remember which one it was, came out and really questioned whether football could happen, you know, because of just the nature of the sport. Again, our state association's pretty much said that they're not going to throw out every sport due to one. So, you know, football could not happen and every other sport could happen. I think football will happen. If you said right now you got to bet $50 on this or whatever, I'm going to say football will happen. But I'm just telling you that it wouldn't shock me if that was the one sport that fell through all of this. Okay. But I think it will happen. Fans is the interesting thing to me. I right now do not see a scenario where they're just going to open the doors and say, come on in. I think there's going to be some modification on that. I don't know whether it's going to be a certain number of tickets per kid, but I guess in my mind, I'm envisioning a volleyball game, okay, where you walk into the gym and it's sort of like going to a restaurant. You have a little area between each area of seats marked off saying this area is not available. Like I was at a restaurant the other day.
Yeah.
This table's not available. There'd be a sign on it. Then this table's not. You know, I could see like little pods of areas in a gym where, okay, they're marked off as unavailable so that people have to sort of sit spaced out. And then in that situation, administration is going to have to work together and say, is there going to be a big enough crowd at this game to where we can't do that? And if that's the case, then we got to put a limit on ticket sales. Football, doesn't it depend on facilities, right? Some facilities you could say, okay, look, we're going to keep people separated by 6 feet or so in the stands. And we've got plenty of outdoor area people can stand in. We've got a hillside over here people can stand on, or we got this, but some facilities don't have that, right? So I think some of it comes down to facilities. How much spread out spaces do you have where people can stand and watch the game, where they don't have to be right on top of each other? But I just, that's the one thing I think there's going to be, because you've really only got a couple spectator. Well, a lot of schools have soccer, so 2 or 3 spectator sports probably in the fall for most schools. Now you get into your bigger schools, and they have a lot of different sports, right? But in most schools, you know, that we see, football, soccer, volleyball are your quote unquote spectator sports. Not so much tennis, not so much golf, not so much cross country. Those sports kind of are used to operating with limited fans. But I just don't see a scenario right now where we just open our doors and say, come on in. I think, unfortunately, there's going to be some modifications. I mean, obviously, I hope I'm wrong, because it's going to be an AD's nightmare, man, trying to figure this stuff out, trying to sort out where people are allowed to sit and how many tickets we have available to sell. But I think you're going to see people get creative with stuff like live streaming of games.
Yes.
Stuff like that going
things out there to where people can watch. Sure.
Right.
I think media could really, go next level with some technology.
Well, and they should. I mean, that's the whole thing we've talked about before. The one thing about this pandemic is the people who have gotten creative are the people who've thrived and succeeded. The people who haven't have sort of fallen down and went under. But so I can see, you're right, media people taking this to a new level with more video, maybe more content throughout the game. For the people that can't be there, but sure. So anyway, I guess that's my prediction. I don't know if I missed anything there. Did I explain that well enough?
I thought you did. What I would end the show on here before I give contact information, get out of here. What is that the question you would have to the listeners? If you were to offer one question for feedback, would it be their prediction?
Yeah, I'd love to hear people's predictions. Do we have all the sports? Is it quote unquote normal, just like it was on every other year? Are there limitations? Do the sports themselves have, we didn't talk about this, but I saw the other day where they're talking about having to extend timeouts. Did you see that? Yeah. Where in some sports, they may have to make like a minute timeout, 2 minutes, in order for everybody to make sure they get a drink out of their own container and not. So do the games themselves have to be modified a little bit in order to make this happen? I don't know, Right. So those would be great feedback questions.
Well, good stuff. And on that note, we'll kind of get out of here. Before I do, let me just kind of throw the contact information out there to you. Check us out on social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. Everything here with behind me here on the banner, SVC Sports Zone. If you just use that, you're going to find us. Facebook Messenger has been one that I've really been getting a lot of feedback on. If you are an email person, you can look me up there at admin1@svcsportzone.com. That's admin, the number 1, at svcsportzone.com. So on that note, I would just remind you, hey, do us a favor if you don't mind. If you enjoy the show, now that we're 11 shows in, subscribe to us at these different places, give us a favorable rating. But most importantly, what I would ask you to do, just in terms of leadership and sports and fans and so forth, take the time, 3, 4, 5 contacts through your email, through your text, through your Facebook Messenger, whatever. If there's people that you think might enjoy our show, Matt and I certainly appreciate you helping us spread the word about it. And we're real excited about what we've been able to do through 11 shows. And I'm telling you, we really have some neat topics coming up. We're really excited. We're really doing some research. I think you're really going to enjoy continue to enjoy expanding the zone over the next 2 months. So Matt, on that note, let's go ahead and get out of here. That puts a capper on show number 11. We appreciate everybody watching us on YouTube and listening to us throughout in your podcast app. Look forward to coming to you here soon again on Expanding the Zone. Thanks, everyone.